Today we will tell you about the final hours of Hitler's life and the facts you are hearing for the first time. Welcome to Whispers of Time. It began in 1936 when they started building a bunker for the German leadership in Berlin. At first it was designed to serve as a refuge against air raids. However, with the situation in Germany feigning normalcy, by the end of 1944, its role began to expand. The bunker was part of the Reich Chancellery building and consisted of two connected shelters. The upper shelter and the second, called the Führerbunker, which was about 2.5 meters underground and was built with additional protection by means of a 3-meter thick concrete slab in order to withstand the most powerful bombs used by the Allies. From there, Hitler and the remnant of the Nazi army tried to continue leading the war efforts and defending Berlin despite the continuous bombardment overhead. Communication with the forces outside was initially maintained via telephones and radio, but over time these means became unreliable, and Hitler was forced to rely on young members of the Hitler Youth Organization to deliver written messages to the few remaining leaders in the army. One of them was a 16-year-old named Armin Lehmann, who found himself in a predicament with the leader he adored, later recalling how strong his faith in the leader was, even in those dark days. He remembered that on January 16, 1945, Hitler was forced to live in the bunker despite propaganda stating otherwise. Hitler, who had not spent much time in Berlin during the war, was now beneath the capital with his beloved Eva Braun, while his mental health deteriorated due to the pressures, the onset of Parkinson's disease, and the mix of medications provided by his personal physicians. Convinced of Germany's technological superiority, Hitler still clung to hope that miracle weapons, such as the Me-262 jet fighter, the V-2 ballistic missile, and the colossal Maus tank, could turn the tide in favor of Germany. However, this hope caused him to become detached from reality, especially since the infrastructure supporting these weapons was gradually being destroyed by Allied bombing, and the bunker itself further isolated him from the reality of his life. The bunker was lavishly decorated. They even displayed pictures of his favorite paintings by Frederick the Great. There was also a wine cellar, which made the war seem to Hitler like something that affected him from afar, something he could not fully grasp. The people living with him in the bunker knew the truth. It was like a prison filled with despair, and many of them were trying to find any means to escape from their sense of impending doom. Among them was Martin Bormann, Hitler's despised personal secretary, who became known for his constant trips to the wine cellar and his depraved behavior with the women who were sheltering in the bunker for fear of Soviet attacks. The corruption and debauchery among the people in the bunker undermined the faith of the zealous, lower-ranking youth in him. As one man witnessed firsthand all of this while receiving messages and then returning to see the chaos and battles taking place in the streets between the city's defenders and the Red Army. On one occasion, after witnessing the signs of intoxication and debauchery in the bunker, this man was shocked when he saw two people outside who were extremely hungry, and he was even more stunned when he found them butchering a wounded horse, still alive and in pain, in order to eat it. This scene reflected the extent of despair that the ordinary citizen had reached. With the onset of April 1945, the Red Army was pushing approximately 2.5 million soldiers toward the outskirts of the German capital, and within just 2 weeks they had reached the center of the city, despite the fierce German resistance. At that point, Hitler spent the remainder of the month underground, while the Red Army was only a few hundred meters from the bunker, pressing the defenders, who were not fighting inside the city, while the Soviet army had completely encircled it. Stalin, the leader of the Soviet Union, did not want any of the Nazi leadership to escape, which also meant that communication between Berlin and the remaining parts of Germany still under German control had become nearly impossible. In reality, most of the German commanders were now without a leader, because Hitler, who was determined to control everything himself, was not really able to communicate with them. Under increasing pressure, Hitler began to notice that his orders to the soldiers in the city were being ignored, especially when people met and felt that those orders were either suicidal or unrealistic. This led him into a severe nervous breakdown, and for the first time he announced that the war was over and that they had lost. Afterwards, he began searching for the most assured method of suicide, which created an atmosphere of terror and despair among those with him in the bunker. It was as if they were part of a suicide pact, and the head of the Air Force, Hermann Göring, even offered to take over the leadership of Germany in place of Hitler, because he felt that Hitler was no longer capable of leading. But Hitler saw this as betrayal and demanded that Göring resign from all his posts and be arrested. Then, news reached the bunker via BBC radio that Hitler had objected to surrendering the rest of Germany to anyone except the Western Allies, and not to the Soviet Union. When Hitler learned that his opposition was rejected, he went insane and ordered the arrest of Himmler and his execution on charges of treason. At the same time, Hermann Vigelin, the representative of the SS forces in the bunker, who had been detained for days on charges of desertion, was executed in the Chancellery meeting as a warning to the others. Despite the entreaties of Eva Braun, whose sister was married to Vigelin and who was pregnant by him, expecting a child at any moment. But on April 28, 1945, reports from outside the bunker stated that the Red Army had reached Potsdamer Platz in the heart of Berlin, less than a kilometer from the bunker. Despite his deteriorating mental state due to stress and the medications he was taking, Hitler knew that his end was near. His army was shattered, his capital was in ruins, and even the people who once adored him had begun to abandon him. All that remained for him now was to prepare himself for his end, so that at least he could die on his own terms. On the night of April 29th, just after midnight, Hitler married Eva Braun, a union that should have taken place earlier. But the official legal documents for the marriage were not available in the bunker. This forced the lawyer Michael Fagner to drive out in an armored car to retrieve the documents while he was being battered by Russian bullets in order to deliver them. Hitler had known Eva for years, ever since she worked as an assistant to his personal photographer at the beginning of his political career. Eva, who came from a middle-class Catholic family, always preferred to stay out of the limelight, except when Nazi propaganda needed her, and she spent her time entertaining herself by skiing and swimming. She did not have much influence on Hitler's political or military decisions, but she provided him with a sense of stability and kept him composed in his troubled life within that bunker. Until the very last moments, the loyalty that Hitler felt was rare in his life, which had become full of betrayal. At that time, Martin Bormann and the propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels attended the wedding ceremony, after which they celebrated with a simple reception and breakfast. Following the ceremony, Hitler went to his office with his personal secretary and began dictating his final will, in which he stipulated that after his death, Joseph Goebbels should assume the position of chancellor and Karl Dönitz the position of head of state. He also laid out instructions regarding what should be done with his body and that of his wife after their deaths. Deeply affected by the news he had received about the fate of his ally, Benta Mussolini, and his beloved, who had been subjected to a grotesque public display, Hitler wanted to avoid his final image ending up like meat hanging in a butcher's shop. Yet in the early hours of April 30th, Hitler looked at the war scene for the last time, perhaps still hoping for a miracle at the final moment. But without any hope, the German forces around Berlin were completely surrounded and were slowly collapsing, and none of them could aid the Luftwaffe. The German army was nearly finished, and most of the pilots who remained fanatically Nazi were trying to escape to the Western Allies for fear of falling into Russian hands. Around 2:00 p.m., Hitler gathered the last members of his staff still in the bunker, among them a doctor named Ernst Schenk, who had previously worked at the Dachau concentration camp and participated in experiments on prisoners. The doctor described Hitler in his final moments as a bent man with weak, trembling arms, red eyes from exhaustion, and a face without expression. In those moments, Hitler thanked them for their service and then went with Eva to spend their final moments together. Nearly at midnight, and a few hours later, Hitler decided to give one last chance to the remaining employees in the bunker to try to escape before the Red Army reached them. Even though previously he had ordered them to kill themselves to the last breath or be killed for cowardice, in the end, he allowed them to choose death. Around 2:30 p.m., Hitler and Eva withdrew from their private room and locked it. That was the last time anyone saw them alive. A few hours later, Hitler's personal servant, Heinz Linge, along with Martin Bormann, entered the room and found their bodies. Hitler, the man who had ignited World War II and caused suffering for millions, was already dead. Those who saw the bodies said that Hitler was sitting on a couch, bent forward with a bullet lodged in his temple, while Eva was beside him, her appearance showing almost no sign of violence. However, the smell of almonds that filled the room indicated that she had died from cyanide. Hitler's body was deteriorating on his rug, and the two corpses were moved to the Chancellery garden. where Hitler used to take his blonde dog for walks. The bodies were doused with gasoline and with great difficulty were set on fire. The flames engulfed them to such an extent that they were no longer recognizable, and thus ends the life of one of the most evil men in history. Yet, even though Hitler's body was gone, the evil he unleashed continued, and his influence still exists in different forms to this day. The world is scarred by the heinous crimes he and his followers committed, and since then humanity has been trying to understand how one person could cause all this destruction, and to learn how to prevent it from ever happening again. Unfortunately, with the continued existence of tyrants and wars on almost every continent, it appears that we still have not fully learned the lesson. This brings us to the end of today's video. We continue to bring you dark documents concerning the history of wars and more. If you liked today's video, don't forget to support us with a like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell so that you receive all the upcoming documents. Goodbye.